Scripture reading this morning will be from Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Great song selection, Dennis. And oh, by the way, I'm really thankful that you got the memo about the camel slacks and either black sport coat or vest this morning. You know, we like to be color coordinated as we go before the Lord on the Lord's Day. Almost to the very day, 37 years ago, on March the 29th, 1982, the Academy Awards ceremony were in progress. There was the signing of the award for Best Picture, and it was a shocking surprise. Chariots of Fire, a finely crafted English film, won 3 other awards that evening. It was so surprising because it did not fit the mold of contemporary cinematography. It was relatively very modest in its budget. The actors were totally unknown. But yet there was one thing that was shocking to me, and that is, it was so wholesome, this film. It focused on the fundamental values of honesty, integrity, and total commitment. It did not really deal much with so many of the Hollywood films, you know, about the immoral aspects of a degenerate society. Chariots of Fire seemed to be almost too conservative for a modern hedonistic culture that is seeking to gratify everything that it can that relates to sin. The greatest shock of all was that it really dealt with religion in a very positive way. The picture was about religious people. It was not about misfits in a society where there's so much evil going on. It dealt, if you will, with magnificent character, with magnificent courage, if you will, and it gave us a kind of caption of heroic principles. See, when you think about Chariots of Fire, it's about British athletes. They are participating in the 1924 Olympics in Paris, France. The story centers on Eric Liddell, the Flying Scotsman, favored to win the 100-meter dash. Well, he was a son of a missionary, and he had very deep religious convictions. He had made a commitment that if the heats of the 100-meter dash were to occur on Sunday, now you have to keep in mind that these athletes are getting in condition, spending 4 years. Their only opportunity is when their event comes up the next 4 years. Sure enough, the 100-meter dash, the heats for that occurred on Sunday. And he said, I'll not take part in that. I'm not going to do that because to me the Lord's Day is vitally important and I can't really run on that day. Oh, the Prince of Wales, King Henry VIII, approached Eric. And he was very quick to remind him, it's your patriotic duty, Eric, to run. See, will you defy your king and your country? And Eric's response was, God made countries and kings to rule them, and God also made laws by which they are to rule. I cannot defy the King of Heaven. Eric Liddell decided that it was more important to run the Christian race than it was to run in the Olympics. And how we can praise that kind of conviction. But you know, It's almost, if you will, unthinkable to me to think about a Christian who would compromise their convictions. We've already this morning been alluding to Hebrews. You realize that letter was really addressed to Jewish Christians who were basically compromising their convictions to return of all things back to Judaism. And the book really has a beautiful storyline, if you will. The first 10 chapters deal with the superiority of Jesus Christ over the law of Moses. And the latter 3 chapters, it really deals with the nature and development and aspects and duties of faith. And we all are certainly captivated, especially by chapter 11, where here we have dynamic illustrations of faith given to encourage these wavering Christians, if you will, to get involved in faithful running the race in allegiance to Jesus. When you go to that chapter, are you not captivated? Are you not really, can you believe how important it is to really see the things that were highlighted there? See, it's important to see that as we successfully run the Christian race, you've got 3 elements that you cannot miss. Of course, there's the race. And then there is, of course, the importance of the pace that we'll deal with in a few minutes. See, it says, let us run the race that is set before us. How important that really is, don't you see? The pace is so vital, but so is looking at Jesus' face. You know, back then, I'm thinking about when that was run, the race that was done so dynamically in those days. I mean, you had to really realize that the race involved a situation where it was marked out for those that were involved in that race. Because you see, there was something called the Colosseum. And the race took place in that oval-shaped Colosseum, and the end of it was open. And when Hebrews was written, you need to understand that it triggered in the mind of those that were reading it back in the 1st century of the Colosseum, and how dynamic that place was. I mean, the Roman rule still had a lot of Greek influence in it, and those Greek games were vital. And I really believe, no question about it, as you look at the oval-shaped Colosseum, it was just dynamic. I mean, there was this really abrupt, it just elevated, just almost straight up like 90 degrees. And there was just seating one upon another. And man, it's just breathtaking if you were clear at the very top of that. And many of these stadiums, by the way, the Colosseums back in those days during the Greek games, could seat anywhere from 25,000 to 100,000. Huge sporting events, if you will. And by the way, the Apostle Paul loved it. You can just go, as I'm going to illustrate in just a few minutes, and look at especially, and I've been in the city of Corinth, and I've gone through ancient Corinth, and I've even set myself in one of those Colosseums, and it was a riveting experience for this preacher. I possibly sat in a place where Paul had been seated. I mean, it's just unreal. I mean, here you look down, and here's this track below in the Colosseum. And this is where the runners were running, and this is where many of the events took place. I mean, you had the foot and the horse and the chariot races. You had jumping events. You had throwing the discus and the javelin, and yes, even boxing events. These were important games that were taking place. And there would be the crowd that would be certainly applauding these events, and especially the winners. And yes, they would crown them, if you will, with this crown of olive and oak leaves. And even it is stated in the annals of history back in the 1st century that the grandchildren of those that won, their grandparents that won, they would be honored for years and years and years. But then there was something else that took place. There was in the race the crowd. And it's interesting to me that it mentions that since we are encompassed about by a great cloud of witness. Can you imagine looking at the races down on that track? And there is this cloud of witnesses. This Greek metaphor here for cloud means a multitude. And the witnesses refers to the aforementioned that are outlined for us in chapter 11 of Hebrews. What a cloud of witness this truly was. I mean, can you imagine looking in the annals of the hero of faith and seeing the names of Abel and Enoch, and yes, that of Noah and Abraham and Moses and Gideon and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Sarah, and yes, even the harlot Rahab is mentioned. I mean, when you go back and see this great cloud of witness, man, oh howdy. Can you imagine? I mean, what is the cloud of witness telling us? They are basically saying that wherever you've got God's grace plus your faith, it equals reward. You ultimately get that prize. That great cloud of witnesses throughout the annals of great heroes of faith surrounding us, will they look to them, we do, for inspiration. And we look to them, if you will, for encouragement. And they give it to us. But you see, there are biblical examples when you think about the cloud of witness. There are those that still, if you will, are living today. And it's important that we understand that. I mean, over there in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 4, it mentions by faith Abel still speaks to us. Now listen to this next part, though he is dead. How can anybody speak to you that is dead? I mean, I know this, that there are heroes that you have that are still living. You have those examples, those cloud of witnesses that are still living, some of which are a part of this congregation, maybe even in the brotherhood of the churches of Christ. And as you look to them, they're giving you encouragement. But I'm looking here at an example of someone who has passed on. This person, Abel, still speaks to us because his influence still speaks. In Revelation chapter 14 verse 13, it talks about the dead in the Lord are blessed. And listen to this. Not only do they rest from their labors, but their deeds follow them. Amen. See, you look to the way that they followed Jesus and the example, the works and influence continue to spur us on. And then Jesus gives a parable over there in Luke 16. And I'm reading about a rich man that passed on and he realized he was in torment. But here's the thing that captivates me. In his dead pass-on situation, he's aware of 5 brothers that he doesn't want to end up in the place of torment that he is in. And what I gain and glean from that is that could it be that heroes of faith are aware of us that have passed on? And I believe they are. See, there are those that touched my life that I wouldn't be standing today and preaching if it were not for them. I think about Joe Banks, who married Rowena and I. And here was this stubborn, cocky, prideful young man that had not accepted the Lord fully and wholly. And I was marrying a woman who believed that I was going to come around. And he was talking to me even at the last minute before I went out to be married to her and saying, Ronnie, the most important decision, this is a good one you're making today. You're marrying a good woman. I've known her and her parents forever. But let me tell you, the most important decision of your life is to be married to Jesus. To take Jesus in your heart and do something about what you've been taught to do. And then I think about Tom Dockery. I mean, here's a man that once I was baptized into Christ, by the way, I had majored at the University of Arkansas in marketing. I was due to go into the clothing business. I even had offers to be a department store manager. That was my lifetime dream. But here Tom Dockery comes along and he says, look, you know, you like clothes and all of that, but let me tell you, you need to be going out and telling people about how to be clothed in Christ. How about that? Amen. Man, that man got me moving in the right direction and I became a preacher. And Eldred Stevens, I don't know, Dennis, we both graduated from the Preston Road School of Preaching, but that man, he waxed with eloquence. I mean, this man, impacted my life like I don't even have words to describe to you this morning. I mean, he made preaching, in the day I became a preacher, something that was the most appealing thing that you could ever do with your life. See, there are people that have passed on that they are a cloud of witness to us, even to this very day. And see, we have a living cloud of witnesses. We've all been influenced by the example of others, and we can look to them. But there's something else that I need to mention to you. Not only do we see that in this race, there is something that is called the Colosseum and the crowd, but there's the challenge. See, the athlete must accept the challenge to run. That's the bottom line. And Christian runners don't prepare the course. We only run the race that is marked out for us. And by the way, I think that's an important point to really grasp and glean. Because you see, you're preparing yourself for the race, not the course. The course has already been marked out. That's already been done. You and I just need to get ourselves right in the race. And we need to rejoice in the privilege we have to run this race with other fellow Christians. Now, here's what I want you to do right now, because I want everyone in this audience to see this, and please cooperate with me in this sense. I want you to raise your hand if you're running the Christian race this morning. Please, raise your hand. Now, I want anybody that's visiting here, wouldn't you want to run in the company of others that just raised their hand? What a privilege it is. I rejoice. I'm not preparing the course that's been marked out. I'm just preparing myself as I run that race with fellow Christians. Man, what a privilege that is. But you know, you think about the race, how important it is that we understand that there's a pace in the race. As was stated a few moments ago by Dennis beautifully. It's a marathon. And we need patient endurance as we run that race. As I think about that Greek word patience, that quality of enduring without complaint, waiting, if you will, with calmness in our hearts, synonyms like steadfastness and long-suffering and fortitude and perseverance, if you will. See, in short, it's the power to endure, the power to suffer, the power, if you will, to wait on God. Biblical patience doesn't sit down and just accept things. Biblical patience says, I'm going to work at mastering those things. It's not some romantic thing that goes about and lends itself to give you wings to fly over all of your hardships. That's ridiculous. That's not the way life is. We have to run patiently as we run that race. It's a determination not unhurrying, undelaying. It is steadfast and it refuses to be deflected and it refuses to be discouraged. We are running with patient endurance this marathon race. And we got to be steadfast. And our attitude is we're going to keep running with endurance until we reach the end, and I like this, the finish line. We must properly pace ourselves as we run this race. Now let me tell you, this preacher has seen those that don't do the pace proper guidance. And they run too fast. And I've seen them fizzle out, if you will, and burn out. I've also watched those in the Christian race that their pace is too slow. They become lethargic. Lethargy, that word means, it's this drowsiness, if you will. It's this apathetic, I lack interest. I lack energy. Who wants to be around somebody like that? I mean, we need to realize that we're in this thing. We're not running a lethargic, slow-paced race. We've got a pace to this thing. And I've seen those that before they ever got started, they dropped out of the race. What a sad situation that is. They've already died and gone back to the Lord, spiritually speaking. See, it's important. We cannot properly pace ourselves in the race without there being strict training and without there being discipline. See, that's why it's so important. I fear sometimes when we're evangelizing that we don't really teach those disciples that there is a cost to count. There is a price to pay. And Jesus was very strong when he was looking. See, Jesus was in the discipleship business. And when Jesus was looking at future disciples, even the 12 men that became apostles, well, he didn't hesitate to tell them what they had to do. In Luke 14:26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, yes, even his own life. Notice what Jesus says here. No apologies. He cannot be my disciple. In other words, those people in your sphere of influence that you love and just love with all of your heart, you've got to love them less than you do Jesus. How important that is to put Him first. And He says, and whoever does not bear his own cross, what is a cross emblematic of? It's emblematic of death is what it's talking about there. In other words, you've got to die to self in order that you may live to Jesus. Amen? If you can't be willing to take up your own cross, you cannot be my disciple. He makes no apologies for that. And so likewise, whoever does not forsake all, that means give everything up. We're living today in a worship society where we worship things and material things and even money. God never said money's evil. He said the love of it is. And it's important that we see that we got to be willing to give everything up for Jesus. If you cannot do that, you cannot be my disciple, Jesus said. Let's not minimize the cost. We sometimes in evangelism act like there's no discipline. Strict training is totally optional. I never read that in my Bible. You're not going to finish this race unless you have strict discipline and training. Listen to what Paul says. In 1 Corinthians 9, do you not know that those who run the race, in a race, all run, but only one wins the prize? Run in such a way so that you may obtain it. Everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do not obtain, but they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we do it to obtain an imperishable crown. And notice he says, but I discipline my body and bring it under subjection, lest as I preach to others I might be disqualified. Do you think that Paul was ever concerned about being disqualified? Yes, he was. Do you think the Apostle Paul saw that he needed to be disciplined as he's running this marathon race? He said, yes, no doubt about it. In the Greek games, I've done a ton of research on this, so I know what I'm talking about here. There were rules that they had to go by, and they had to train at least 10 months and longer before their event they were involved in. And it was under strict training rules by someone who conducted those rules and had them trained. And if they ever opted out, they were disqualified before the event ever started. It is important to understand that every day we got to be disciplined as we run this race. Because don't you see, there's a face that we're trying to look at here as we run this race. See, as you're running the race, you need to lay aside every weight and sin which so easily besets us. Lay it aside. That word weight there means bulk of body, excess of flesh. The early athletes trained to remove the excess. I was taught and told as I did my research that the runners actually, I'm talking about in the first century, they took weights and tied them to their ankles and they trained with their event with those weights. That's what Paul's talking about. When they got ready to line up to run, the trainer comes over and takes the weights off of their ankles. Can you imagine how light it was when they ran that event? You and I today need to get the excess off, the excess baggage. Get it off. Throw it off as it hinders you. The lust of eyes, the pride in possessions, the sin of unbelief. Get rid of the excess because you've gone into strict training. Get rid of the appetites and the passions that are perverting your life, for you may be disqualified from this wonderful prize. See, as I look at this during the Christian race with a patient pace, we need to fix our eyes on Jesus. Amen. I mean, looking unto Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And do you know what that looking really means? I did a study on that, a word study. It means to look away from every other thing and to make the person or the thing under contemplation the object of interest. In other words, if you're focusing really on Jesus and His face, you're going to win the race. How about that? See, it's important that we see that. Jesus holds the prize. There's three things we need to see here. You look at His face because He holds the prize. And listen, it's important because His countenance motivates each one of us today to finish our race. And we need to understand, let's go back to that Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith. He's the one who told us and taught us what we need to do. Our objective is to win the prize. We must be goal-oriented. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 24, run in such a way to get the prize. In verse 26, he goes on to say that I don't run aimlessly. In other words, I press on towards the goal. I never will forget that years ago, I was going to Russia. And one of my bucket list things was to go to London. And so we stopped in London and did some mission work there. And Ronald Coleman, a missionary, after doing the mission work, I said, listen, Ronald, on my bucket list, you know how I love history. I want to go to the British Art Museum. I've wanted to do this all my life. And so Ronald took me there and I could talk for hours about it. It was just the thrill of a lifetime to go through that. And as I was going through there, we went into one section of that where they had on display all of the crowns that had ever graced British royalty. It was a dazzling sight, glittering gold bands studded with gems worth millions of dollars. And yet the King of Heaven is going to give us a wonderful crown. And Ronald said to me, Ronnie, you've got to be very quiet. I know you by nature are so enthusiastic and you raise your voice and people here are so quiet. So I was really, I zipped it up and I was quiet. And as Ronald was looking at all those gold diadems and those jewels just glistening in the light, all of a sudden he said, and mine will be greater than all of them. That's what he said. And I said, Ronald, but don't worry, brother, I agree with you 100%. It's going to be greater than all of them. See, it's so important that we see that. Paul said, I did not run for nothing. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, 7 and 8, he said, I've finished the race. I've kept the faith, and now is in store for me a crown of righteousness, but not for me alone, but for all those that love His appearing. Many an athlete in the first century lost the race because they lost the focus on the prize. Why is it sometimes we aim at nothing and we have this tendency to achieve it with remarkable accuracy? We must be aiming at the right prize. Get your eyes fixed on Jesus. He holds the prize. His countenance motivates you to finish, and He is the author and the perfecter of your faith. Looking at His faith does nothing less than seeing a face that exudes with confidence. Now my lesson is coming to closure. And I have one final thing I want to really get you to focus on. I want you to look at His face. Hebrews 12:3 says, enduring, despising shame and opposition from sinful men. I ask you, please, dearly beloved, look at His face in horrible agony on a cross. I'm asking you to look at His face, and I want you to see the nails tearing through His flesh and His tendons. And I want you to look at His face, is what I'm begging you to do today. And I want you to see the crown of thorns of blood, sweat, and tears streaming down His face. I'm asking you to look at that today. And I want you to look at His face And I want you to see the radiance that's on his face with victory as he sits down at the right hand of God on the throne of God. Jesus endured to the end. He would not throw in the towel. And he said, I don't want you to throw in the towel. I want you to run with patient endurance. And I guess and I suspect that's the one quality Jesus had that I admire the most. He would not throw in the towel. Everything about Jesus should motivate you to finish the race. Oh, by the way, I need to tell you something else. I need to tell you what happened to Eric Lytle, because you're not going to believe this. The kindness of one of his teammates came up to him and said, how about you run the race I run, the 400 meters? The heats are not on Sunday. He qualified. By the way, he was running against a Swiss runner and a Swedish runner, both of which had broke world records. Eric, this wasn't his best race. But the fellow athlete, just as he lined up ready to run, went over and gave him a piece of paper. And Eric opened it up, and you could see him read it, and then he smiled. And then he clutched it in his fist. And that particular day, he ran that 400-meter race, and you know what happened? He won the race. He brought home to Great Britain the gold. A world record was set that day at 47.6 in the 400 meter. And the message that Eric read from his fellow teammates said, he that honoreth me, Jehovah, I will honor him. I want to say to you today, God will honor you in this way. If you will honor Him and run with endurance this race that is set before us, then you will one day be patiently sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. And your crown of glory, by the way, will outshine all the diadems of kings past. I tell you, there's nothing greater than being involved in the Christian race. And my strong encouragement to you today is let us all together collectively run this race. I don't know how much longer Rowing and I are going to be with you before the new minister comes in. But let me tell you, every one of you that's here today, I love you with all of the love that a man can muster up in my heart. I love you for your love for the Lord. And I one day, if I never get to see you after I leave Lakeview, I want to see you again in heaven. I want every one of us to be together in heaven and talk about this race that we've run together. And let's keep patiently enduring till we cross the finish line.